Welcome to this webinar of the Jerusalem Press Club. I'm Uri Dromi, CEO of the club, and I want to start with thanking my colleagues Talia Decker and Rachel Exil for facilitating this event. We are privileged to host today Dr. Michael Oren, former Israeli ambassador to Washington, author of books on the Six-Day War, American involvement in the Middle East, and American-Israeli relations. He has a PhD in Middle East Studies from Princeton University. He was a Knesset member of the Kulani Party, so we can really benefit from his experience in all arenas, academic, diplomatic, and political. Journalists online wishing to ask questions, please do it through chat, and I'll read them aloud. Ambassador Oren, thanks for taking the time to be with us. Let's begin with the disturbing poll released recently, which shows that among respondents to the poll or survey commissioned by the Jewish Electorate Institute, 34% of American Jews agreed that Israel's treatment of Palestinians is similar to racism in the United States. 25% agreed that Israel is an apartheid state, and 22% agreed that Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinians. What is your response to this?
Good to be with you too at the Jerusalem Press Club, Ori. Thank you for hosting me. Very disturbing poll. I know that myself and many of my colleagues were stunned by the statistics that were published from the poll. There is some mitigating factors, such as 60% of American Jews who were polled say that Israel is emotionally important to them. 63% agreed with the statement that denying the Jewish people the right to self-determination, that Israel should not exist, is anti-Semitic. So there's some mitigating factors, but there's no getting around that 34%, the 25%, the 23% that has Israel being a racist country, Israel being an apartheid state, and Israel committing genocide. It's important to note that this poll was conducted by an organization associated with the Democratic Party. And it's important to note that these statistics break down, interestingly, between Democrats and Republicans. The statistics are much more severe when Democrats are questioned, more severe still when young Democrats are posted. But this, again, we come back to that sort of bedrock reality that there is a significant portion of American Jews, whether Democrat or otherwise, young or otherwise, who believe that this is a fundamentally racist state, that they believe that we are committing genocide. And that's extraordinary findings, extraordinary in the fully negative sense. I would wonder whether these American Jews who were being questioned understand the meaning of the word genocide. Do they actually believe that we are lining Palestinians up and putting them in gas chambers and ovens? How would they then explain the Palestinian population of the West Bank has quadrupled since 1967? What exactly genocide is going on? I question whether they understand the meaning of the word. I think it's important to contextualize, and this is no way to minimize, but to textualize the questions. Many of these Jews are subjected, certainly on campuses, certainly in large parts of the American media, to a relentless barrage of accusations about Israel, accusing Israel of apartheid. Again, not understanding what apartheid was. We don't have separate bathrooms. We don't have separate restaurants. We don't have separate schools that are imposed. We have some schools that are voluntary. We have a voluntary separation between Jewish and Arab schools, but they're not imposed. And that atmosphere of incitement against Israel, of delegitimization against Israel, is having a profound impact on American Jewish opinion. And you cannot help but note that. And so we have to internalize, and we have to reach certain conclusions. One of the conclusions is that for a maybe perhaps significant segment of those who have answered, from the 34% down to the 23%, we cannot influence their opinions because we can't be there and counter every charge that is made against us in the media or in campuses or in any other type of environment.
So you're giving up on them? These are lost people?
I think that Israel has to be realistic about it, Uri, and that there are processes that are occurring in the United States that have nothing to do with the state of Israel, and over which we have no impact. We have no influence. We didn't create cancel culture. We didn't create critical race theory. We didn't create political correctness. We didn't create intersectionality. And I believe that Israel could create a Palestinian state tomorrow, and it would not materially impact these statistics, because it's no longer about what we do, it's about who we are. And if the regnant perception is that Israel is a colonialist racist state created in sin, white supremacy state, they're now calling it Jewish supremacy state, there's little that we can do in terms of policy that's going to impact that. And there's little that we can do in policy that won't endanger us in terms of our security. We can create a Palestinian state tomorrow, but it's not going to cohere. It doesn't have a leadership. And we certainly cannot outsource our security to that state. And the Palestinians would never agree to it. So we're caught in a bind. So the degree that we can do anything, I still don't think it's going to materially change. BDS is not about Palestinian statehood. It's not in favor of a two-state solution. BDS advocates for the destruction of the state of Israel. And increasingly, the progressive wing, in the form of certain members of Congress, in the form of Peter Beinart, who has basically called for Israel to commit suicide in order to, expiate its sins against the Palestinians by admitting, millions and millions of Palestinian refugees and their descendants, and basically disappearing as a Jewish state. It's the only way we can expiate our sins. It's not about what we do anymore. It's about who we are. Okay. But having said that, there may be, and here's my response to your question. We can't give up on all of these Jews, and we're going to have to do our best to save those that we can convince, and to reach out to them. And how we do that, I think the most effective means is by bringing these young Jews here, so they can see that this is not an apartheid state, that nobody is committing genocide here, to have them understand what is the meaning of accusing the Jewish state of being a Nazi state. What does that mean? In historical terms, in terms of reality, understanding the gravity of that charge, the outrageousness of that charge. And we are not making that type of effort. I guarantee you, we are not making that type of effort. We failed there.
You seem to point in terms of responsibility to the BDS, anti-Israel propaganda on campuses, etc. But is there something we can do ourselves in terms of not hasbara or PR, but in terms of policies that might change attitudes toward Israel?
Yeah, certainly. When I see that LGBT groups in the United States are making common cause with the supporters of Hamas, when Israel has long been a world leader in LGBT rights and hosts the largest gay pride parade in Asia, and if you're gay in Gaza Strip, you could be taken out and executed. Believe me, we're not doing enough. We don't do our own intersectionality. But having said that, listen, Israel has policies which are unpalatable to a large number of liberal and certainly progressive Americans, whether it be our settlement policy, our policies for house demolition. And these policies reflect an Israeli political reality, which at times is at loggerheads with American liberal political reality. Here's an interesting statistic. Most young people in the world, particularly in the Western world, are left-wing. And usually you have an industrial and a military elite, which is right-wing. But in Israel, it's just the opposite. Our military and industrial elite are left-wing, and our youth is right-wing. And our youth is right-wing because they don't remember Camp David, they don't remember the Oslo Accords, they remember the Second Intifada, they remember missiles from Hamas, they remember missiles from Hezbollah. It's very difficult to convince Israeli young people, and I've had this experience of actually talking to great numbers of groups of Israeli young people, difficult to convince them that if you give up territory, you're going to get peace, because their experience is you give up territory, you get rockets. And Israel also has the largest per capita youth population under 30 of any industrialized country. We have by far the highest natural growth rate. So this right-wing bloc of youth exercises a tremendous influence on Israeli politics. And so that has taken the entire political system rightward. So at a time when the youth in the United States are gravitating to the left. And so there, you may say that there are seismic or centripetal forces at work here, which again, are beyond our control.
You mentioned that there's a difference between how Democrats and Republicans would answer the same questions in this survey. Do you think that the policy of the Netanyahu government, Netanyahu specifically, has alienated Democrats to the point that support of Israel has stopped being a bipartisan issue?
I think that the assault on bipartisanship began well in advance of, say, the Obama-Netanyahu period. I saw it during the Bush period when I was politically and diplomatically active then as well. It's been a long sort of erosion of that bipartisanship. And I should be very clear that I view bipartisan American support for Israel as a strategic national interest for this country. Not everybody agrees with this, with me. Many people in the Israeli government think it's too late, that it's a lose-lose situation. And that whatever resources we have should be invested in strengthening our base rather than giving those resources to people who ultimately won't be with us. I disagree still, but it's an uphill battle, I got to tell you, Ori. Certainly, the way Netanyahu conducted his policy toward Obama, and toward Obama sort of joined in that, took two to tango, I must tell you. When I was up close, I saw it, because Obama came, in his first week in office, came out swinging at us and trying to change the U.S.'s relationship and trying to downgrade it and put demands on Israel that no Israeli government could hold. Keep in mind, even this Israeli government, which has significant left-wing elements in it, is not going to be able to stop all building in East Jerusalem and in Judea and Samaria. It just isn't. No Israeli government can do that. So it was impossible demands. But the fact that it was very publicly fought out, and we have these same disagreements with the Biden administration, but it's not being publicly fought out. The public nature of the clash during certainly the Obama Netanyahu years and later the Netanyahu-Biden years alienated large segments of the Democratic Party. I personally opposed Netanyahu's speech to the joint session of Congress in 2015. It didn't make me very popular with him, I must say. I didn't oppose the content of the speech. I opposed the location of the speech because I knew what the impact would have on bipartisanship. And then subsequently, I did not get the impression that the Israeli government made a nearly sufficient effort to reach out to Democrats.
Now, with the new government in Israel, which is more diverse, and already we heard some friendly noises from the White House, do you see a change in the relations?
I see a change in the tone, and sometimes change in tone can devolve into or evolve into substantive changes. We still are going to disagree on the peace process. I don't see Naftali Bennett coming out in favor of a two-state solution. I don't see Gideon Sa'ar coming out in favor of a two-state solution, or even Yvette Lieberman. And they will not declare a moratorium on building in Judea and Samaria and East Jerusalem. So we have that difference with the administration. Right now, it's not a material difference because the administration understands that there's really no chance for advancing a peace process. There's no effective Palestinian leadership, tremendous opposition in the Israeli public opinion. The biggest difference is going to be over Iran, where the administration is determined to renew the JCPOA of 2015. And Israeli leaders, and here I would include myself in that group, view the JCPOA as a strategic, if not existential threat to the Jewish state. That is a substantive agreement. But so far, these agreements have been kept under wraps, behind closed doors. I hope it would keep up that way, maintain that way.
The criticism against Netanyahu is that there was a lot of rhetoric on his part on the Iran issue, but very little action, and that the agreement actually helped more to curtail Iran's efforts. What are your opinion about this?
I didn't understand the second. Well, I didn't understand the second part of your question, Ori.
The second part is that the agreement, the 2015 agreement, could have done more to curtail Iran's efforts to become nuclear than all the rhetoric that led to its annulment.
There's a school of thought that says that. I don't adhere to that school of thought. I think that the agreement that was reached was very much an agreement that Secretary Kerry wanted. I think it served America's interest of kicking the can down the road. When President Biden says Iran won't get a bomb on my watch, no, it won't get a bomb on his watch. It'll get a bomb in 7 years. That I'm almost entirely certain. I'm almost entirely certain that JCPOA will lead not to a local war, but to a regional war. And I see no way sort of around it. You want to read the scenario, read the article I wrote for the Atlantic Monthly about the coming Middle Eastern war. See it very clearly. And I would consider myself a political centrist, and I'm saying this. I understand that we do not have confluent interests with the United States. The United States wants to get out of the Middle East. It's no longer dependent on Middle Eastern oil. It does not have a military option against Iran. America is incapable / unwilling to project major military power on the world. It certainly doesn't want to get into a military confrontation with Iran at this time. And from our perspective, an agreement that will enable Iran to get a bomb in 7 to 8 years, and in the meantime, enrich Iran with hundreds of billions of dollars that the Iranians will not spend on schools and hospitals, but will spend on more missiles, that's a disaster. And so my preferred response to this would be, okay, let's not follow the Netanyahu paradigm of publicly speaking about this. Let's get into an intimate discussion based on trust with the new administration about how the United administration, if it intends to renew the JCPOA, how then will the administration shore up Israel's ability to defend ourselves against this threat, what kind of understandings we can reach about America's position in any coming conflict between Iran and Israel, and how the United States can enhance our capabilities. And I think there's tremendous amount to talk about there. But again, it has to be based on trust and discretion.
Assuming that an independent Israeli military action is not a preferred option, would you rather recommend maybe upgrading the relations between Israel and the United States into some kind of a formal alliance?
No, I've always been against the defense treaty. By the way, I'm also against military aid, but that's another story. No, I think Israel doesn't need that. I think we have all the benefits of a mutual defense pact, in particular, the congressional commitment to uphold our qualitative military edge. The United States has committed by law to enable Israel to defend itself by itself against any Middle Eastern adversary, or any combination of Middle Eastern adversaries. And the president has to report twice a year to the Congress as to how his administration is upholding that commitment. It's extraordinary. On the other hand, a military alliance will tie Israel's hands and compel us to entirely coordinate our military activity. Israel has to maintain its independence. It is extremely important, Uri, that if we entered this discussion with the United States about understandings and capabilities, that we make it unequivocally and categorically clear that we are not beholden in any way to this agreement, and that Israel will never forfeit its maneuverability, its ability to defend itself as it sees fit.
In the past, you called the BDS a serious threat to Israel, and it seems that with all the money and efforts invested in fighting it, BDS is still alive and kicking. And recently, we got this announcement by Ben & Jerry's that they're not going to sell ice cream in the settlements. What is your take on this?
Well, I think that the battle against BDS is a seesaw battle. They win a few battles, but so far we've won the war in the sense that BDS has been incapable of inflicting serious economic damage against the state of Israel. In fact, except for Corona, our economy has been thriving through high tech. And yes, maybe we're going to have problems with ice cream, but we're not going to have problems in any other area of technology, whether in cyber defense or in, autonomous driving or water technology or nanotechnology or 3D printing, all those areas in which Israel excels. You're not going to see Israel being boycotted there. What the BDS can do is create an atmosphere. We've seen it reflected in this poll now of American Jews, of a steady erosion of Israel's legitimacy, our ability to defend ourselves, even our ability to exist as an independent Jewish state. That could have legal ramifications if the issue comes to the International Criminal Court. And our enemies know they can't destroy us with all those missiles. They can't. They can ruin our day, but they can destroy us economically through sanctions and boycotts. And that's where BDS poses a long-term threat.
So what's the best way to counter it? I mean, should the government be doing it, or the business sector, or Jewish organization, or what?
The answer is yes to all of them, and they should be, to some degree, coordinated. You know, when I was in Knesset, I headed a classified committee that looked at some of the most sensitive issues in Israel's security and foreign policy. One of the issues I looked at was our fight against BDS, and what we discovered in closed session was that Israel is woefully unprepared to deal with this threat, lacking international lawyers, lacking researchers, not taking it seriously. You know, we haven't quite internalized, Uri, that one of the principal battlefields, if not the main battlefield, is not Gaza or southern Lebanon. The main battlefield is this computer screen, it's public opinion, and how public opinion then impacts government decisions, and how government decisions can lead to condemnations, and how condemnations can lead to sanctions and boycotts. And our enemies understand that very well. They have a military tactic that leads to a media, diplomatic, and legal strategy, which is designed to take us down. And it's very clever. And they do it systematically, war after war after war. If you notice in this last war, it was one of the shortest wars and had one of the lowest levels of Palestinian casualties. Palestinians fired as many rockets in 11 days as they did in 26 days in 2014. And we got condemned three times as harshly. So on that battle, they are, you know, indisputably winning.
Forming the last government, or the recent government, one ministry that was abolished was the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, which fought BDS. Do you think it was a good move, or should this ministry be kept on going, or perhaps the foreign ministry should be doing the work?
Well, the foreign ministry would do the work, but you have to do two things with the foreign ministry. You have to greatly increase its budget, and you have to reform the foreign ministry from the inside. And so there are two steps you have to take before you could put this type of responsibility on the foreign ministry. Pending that, there should actually be a Ministry of Public Diplomacy.
Separate from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs?
It could be in tandem with, but until the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is capable of taking on this. I mean, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs took on the responsibility of defending Israel during the recent conflict with Gaza. And as someone who was interviewing around the clock, I will tell you that was not a successful operation.
There's a rise in anti-Semitism all over the world. What is your opinion about it? Is it only related to Israel, or it has, or some other phenomena really sparked this kind of recent rise in anti-Semitism?
I think the answer to that question is yes. Yes. Yes, it's related to Israel, and hatred of Israel, anti-Zionism is a very convenient and safe way to be anti-Semitic. And we've seen now in the United States and elsewhere how what begins as anti-Semitism quickly bleeds into anti-Zionism, quickly bleeds into anti-Semitism, whether it be, you know, pro-Palestinian demonstrators going around beating up Jews in New York and Los Angeles with baseball bats. We see how that morphs very, very quickly. But I think that anti-Semitism has very deep roots, as it always has throughout history, with economic crises, with confusion, with alienation, a deep human desire to identify some evil, some enemy that is causing all the distress in the world. And the Jews are always a convenient target. So the answer to that is yes, there are many causes.
Ambassador Oren, I know your time is short, so I want to thank you so much for being with us and taking the questions. And thank you everybody who's watching us online, and stay tuned to our next event. Thank you all.
We hope you enjoyed that briefing by the Jerusalem Press Club. If you did, like the video and hit the subscribe button to stay up to date with all of our future content.